Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this further series of FTA's webinars on Brexit. We have a good attendance for this webinar, so we're delighted that those of you that have registered and have joined the webinar. I'm going to go through what we're going to cover today and a few house rules in terms of how we manage the webinars. But firstly, I'm Chris Welsh. I'm FTA's Director of Global and European Policy, so I have direct responsibility for our Brussels office and basically the main areas of FTA's Brexit policy issues. And this webinar is going to particularly focus on the latest political developments and, more importantly, how those political developments are going to shape the further discussions we have with the government and in Brussels. So it will be not just a political approach to it; it will be the political and practical implications of that for the freight industry. As time has gone on, the European Commission has and the European Union has outlined its arrangements for those negotiations and priorities for those negotiations, and that includes a number of what we call red lines, in the same way that the UK government has established what its objectives are. In other words, the UK government's red lines. So we'll just run through those and give you an overview in terms of how we think that's going to impact the negotiations from a freight perspective. And there will be the opportunity for you to pose questions on the webinar platform. We will leave a bit of time at the end to try and answer any of those questions that you've got. If there isn't time, then we will get back to you on those questions on an individual basis, and we will also place them on the FTA website along with a full transcript of the webinar to deal with any points that you raised during the course of the webinar. And if you've got any further things that occur to you afterwards, then clearly we will be happy to deal with that. Also on this webinar is Pauline Bastidon. Pauline is head of European policy and runs our Brussels office, and in fact is joining this webinar from our Brussels office. And Pauline will go through a lot more of the technical detail as having line responsibility for this from the Brussels end. So just a few house rules in terms of how we're managing the webinar. We would ask you if you could keep your microphone and telephone muted, because that will improve the quality of the webinar. As I said, the webinar will be recorded. It will be available on the FTA website. But we won't actually be able to deal with any of the technical issues during the course of the webinar. And please, if you've got a question, please place it on the webinar platform, and we'll endeavour to deal with that. So where are we now? Well, I just want to point out and give confidence to FTA members that we genuinely are leading on Brexit for the UK logistics industry. The decision affects virtually all segments of FTA membership, whether you're a vehicle operator, whether you're a shipper, importer, exporter, third-party logistics provider, freight forwarder, all aspects of the logistics supply chain are impacted by this. And go into a bit more detail about this, but FTA has produced an ABC guide to Brexit and a Brexit Manifesto, and basically the ABC guide just picks out the wide range of issues that impact those segments of FTA membership. And the Brexit Manifesto is our first high-level communication to MPs, MEPs, and other senior policymakers in terms about what the implications of Brexit are for the freight and logistics industry, and why they need to take these views seriously in the upcoming discussions. There's ways in which you as members can be more involved in the decision-making process, because all FTA positions agreed on how we approach Brexit are agreed by members, and that process is undertaken through our democratic structure. So if you want to do that, get involved in our regional freight councils or our national councils, such as the British Shippers Council if you're an importer-exporter, and the Rail Freight Council if you've got rail supply chains. All of those bodies give you the opportunity of expressing your views and having maybe a deeper understanding of the implications in the supply chain. And in addition to that, we've set up a number of specialist groups, such as the FTA Customs Working Group, because this is really going through the detail of the changes that are likely to be necessary if Britain clearly does pursue the hard Brexit, or not only coming out of the single market but leaving the customs union. And that working group is up and running, has a great deal of expertise from across the supply chain, whether you're a freight operator or a shipper that is having to deal with customs declarations and that kind of thing. And that customs working group is specifically linked to the full customs and treasury groups that are dealing with the customs issues related to Brexit. So there's a clear interface there with government. We've also got a wide range of documents and other events and communications which you can find on the FTA website under fta.co.uk/Brexit. So please come into that on a regular basis, because we do place documents on there, and hopefully that will be a useful source of reference for you in terms of how enabling you to understand the issues and help manage that process within your company. Next slide, please. Just focusing on the FTA manifesto, it really makes a number of key points, and that is that with the new situation that is presented to us, this is an opportunity along the lines of government objectives in looking at the global implications of this and what it means for Britain. And it is about making the most of new international opportunities. So we are already working with members and our actual counterparts at the other end of the international supply chain in countries like Australia, Canada, Sri Lanka, the Indian subcontinent, and others. The kind of free trade agreements that industry would want in order to simplify trade procedures, get rid of red tape, this so-called frictionless trade that the government talks about. We are very keen to ensure that industry's perception of what frictionless trade means prevails and is understood by government, rather than what maybe a government description or definition of frictionless sort of means. So a lot of work to be done and is underway on that process. So if you're importing and exporting on an international basis, then keep close to us on that, and you can become involved through our British Shippers Council. The other key area is accessing the EU market post-Brexit, and this is all about ensuring that trade can take place across Europe under the best possible terms. That means frictionless border arrangements, ensuring that the customs procedures are arranged in a way that doesn't add additional burden to UK business, and we are already being consulted by HM Customs and Treasury, Border Force and other authorities about the specifics of that, and more importantly, if we do have a hard Brexit, how can we avoid some of the problems that may arise as a result of that? Everybody, I think, is conscious of the fact that our major artery is the Dover-Calais ferry route, and the last thing we want to see is long delays at borders with trucks having problems both accessing and exiting from Calais and Dover. Again, you can obtain details about the manifesto on the FTA website, but we give 10 key recommendations for government in terms of what it needs to make the Brexit a success for the logistics sector, and I focus just on a few of those right now. So at this stage, I'd like to now pass over to Pauline Bastidon, who will take you through some of the latest developments. Over to you, Pauline.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. So there are a few things that are still very unknown at the moment, not least the political landscape. I mean, you will all know, of course, that there is a UK general election planned on the 8th of June. But also quite a lot of political developments elsewhere in Europe. So there was quite recently a presidential election in France with a new president, Mr. Macron, and forthcoming parliamentary elections planned for mid-June. A lot of political instability at the moment in Austria, in Italy, the Netherlands as well, and in Ireland as well most recently, with the Prime Minister, Mr. Kenny, having announced that he wanted to step down. So all of this plus elections planned in Germany in the autumn mean that essentially a lot of the players that will be around the table from the EU27 side are not necessarily known yet. Will there be a deal or no deal at the point of exit? That's also something which of course we cannot know at this stage. When we went to see the task force of Mr. Barnier, we were told in very specific terms that no deal, although this is obviously not the course they want to pursue, is an option. It's a risk, and therefore industry needs to be prepared and ready. The nature of the agreement, as well as whether or not there will be transitional arrangements and what will be the nature of these arrangements, are also things that are unknown at this stage. But there are, however, some certainties and a growing list of certainties. So the sequencing of negotiations is now much clearer. We know that negotiations are likely to take place in 4 phases, the first 3 taking place before Brexit, and I'll come back to that later on during the webinar. We have a clear understanding of both the UK and now the EU red lines as well. Certainly the red lines in terms of the first phase of negotiation. So for instance, on the situation of EU and UK citizens, or what would happen with regard to Ireland, for instance. And I think it's worth mentioning at this stage that nothing changes until the withdrawal agreement has been signed, and that the rules and regulations are likely to remain the same beyond Brexit. So I'm going to hand over to Chris to give you an overview of the ABC guide on the next slide.
Yes, I referred to this earlier, and this is just our latest checklist on all of the issues that are likely to impact members as a result of Brexit. I've already referred to some of these already, in particular the access to the single market. This is clearly one of the most important elements of any agreement with the EU. Again, we as FTA are doing some work and modelling work with outside consultants on looking at the best possible kind of trade deal that we want. In other words, we keep as many features of the single market and access to the single market as possible, and that is clearly going to be the basis of the government negotiations with the EU after the general election, the UK general election. Border controls is really a very key priority for us, and we, as I explained earlier, we're very much involved in talking to Border Force and Customs and making DFT and other government departments aware of the potential problems, especially with the introduction of, i.e., new border controls that will be required, or B, new additional customs procedures that will need to come into force. And that leads directly into the next ABC customs tariffs and procedures. It's estimated that with the UK leaving the single market and more importantly the customs union, that will require something like 300 million customs entries to be processed. So we are engaging with customs to ensure that customs chief system and its successor, an updated version of that, is able to cope with that. We're working to ensure that the procedures are kept to a minimum, with clearly customs clearance arrangements not taking place at borders but away from borders. And we are openly discussing some form of either trusted trader, authorised economic operator arrangement that would be shipper and operator friendly, that could be used as a means of speeding the process, taking customs clearance away from borders to manufacturers' premises or other designated areas. So a lot of work going on, as I said, in our customs working group on that, but also with government on that particular issue. I've already mentioned global markets and what we're doing there, and that links nicely with Heathrow, because the importance of the third runway at Heathrow for connectivity for the UK to be able to trade with our international markets in Asia, North America, and the Indian subcontinent, and having new routes, a greater flexibility for flights, early morning flights, that kind of thing is going to be really crucial for industry. So FTA is working hard in those areas to get the right agreements to ensure that UK businesses are able to better compete in this new global environment that we're likely to be in. And we're going to go through all of those issues there, but you can see the scale and range of issues that are confronting us and how complex this is right now. So we're going to focus on one or two of those key issues in going through the webinar, and in particular that will be borders, where we are with that, and with Ireland, which is the other area of concern for many FTA members. So, Pauline, can you take us through the borders and Ireland issues, please?
So, thank you, Chris. Yes, on the border, there are two different things, really. You've got the immigration checks, and I'll focus on that first. So, basically, this is you now have a bilateral treaty in place called Le Touquet, whereby juxtaposed controls can take place, meaning that technically the UK border is in Calais at present. Immigration checks would take place in Calais, and stowaways are removed from trucks while still on the French territory. However, the new French president, recently elected, has called for a renegotiation of Le Touquet treaty, not giving much details as to what exactly should replace it. But we're worried that the concept of juxtaposed controls could be put into question. Obviously, this is an issue because of restricted space in Dover. We're worried that the frequency of services could also decrease, because of this, that this could lend to lengthy queues, and we're not really sure where the checks could take place in Dover, to be honest, because of the physical setup of the port. So we've been quite vocal in urging both governments to protect the treaty and the juxtaposed control arrangements. And of course, we will do more than keep an eye on this and try to influence on the process and make sure that what works well for both countries, for both industries, continues to exist in the foreseeable future. Obviously, there will be similar issues with customs checks and other types of checks, and we've estimated the cost to industry at £3.21 for 1 minute of delay just for one truck. So you can imagine how much this could cost if delays become disproportional. But as always, we're in very close contact with government to make sure that this does not happen. Moving on to Ireland, that's also another area where we've had quite a lot of developments lately to report on. Obviously, Ireland has got the unique situation of having a land border with the UK. It's got a very high dependency of trade, especially with Northern Ireland, with many businesses actually operating on an island of Ireland basis. And I think it's fair to say that Ireland has been recognised as a special issue by both the UK government and the EU 27 negotiating side. Mr. Barnier, the chief negotiator, has made it quite clear that the EU was willing to find a solution for Ireland, that Ireland was indeed a specific case, and this is one of the points that will be discussed first in the negotiations when they start. It's also important to state, however, that yesterday the Revenue Commissioner, Liam Irwin, gave evidence to the Irish Parliament Finance Committee, and he said that while authorities would of course try to minimise customs control post-Brexit, these would nonetheless be required under EU law. He stated that the number and value of customs declarations was likely to increase by a factor of 10, and that checks would need to be conducted on 6 to 8% of the freight, mainly checks to make sure they had the right documents and so on, with a small number of physical inspections, and that these checks would not be happening at the border but at trade facilitation posts that would be located 10 to 15 kilometers away from the border. He also mentioned that risk-based or random customs checks carried out by mobile units were a possibility, and that all of the customs transactions would happen electronically in the future. However, with 6,000 vehicles movements as a minimum on a daily basis between Northern Ireland and the Republic, we've calculated that checks would apply for around 500 vehicles every day. So obviously it will be crucial to make sure that this does not create undue delay, and we would try to push for the number of checks to be minimised and to be focused on vehicles where risks have been identified, essentially. That's an area that we will follow very, very closely, and which is going to be one of the first ones to be discussed. Moving on to the legal process, so some of you who might have been on the webinars before will be familiar with this process by now. Basically, the court was in the UK's camp to start with, but it's now very firmly in the EU camp. The European Council has agreed guidelines for the conduct of the negotiations, stating who was going to be responsible for what the sequencing would be like, which topics were going to be discussed when. We're waiting for them to give the green light for the start of negotiations, but of course the general election will delay that a little bit. And the 2-year period for the negotiation of the withdrawal agreement started when Article 50 was triggered, so we're in the middle of it, basically, at this stage. Obviously, the outcome will depend on how successful the negotiations are, but as I mentioned, and that's the point I want to stress, we've been told that there is a possibility, although of course it's not the objective, that no deal will be reached in time and no extension to the negotiations will be secured, in which case the EU treaties would cease to apply and the WTO rules would kick in on 29th of March 2019. Next, please. So there are going to be 4 phases in the negotiations. That's quite clear from the Council guidelines. So the technical process of going from one to the other and when exactly everything will start is still up for debate, because of course the UK government might have different views, but the structure is now broadly known. So the first 3 phases, the withdrawal arrangements, the framework for the future relationship, and the transitional measures should be discussed before Brexit, with a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU being discussed and concluded post-Brexit. What I wanted to stress at this point is that we've been told quite clearly that transitional measures will only be possible if and only if they are entrenched in the withdrawal arrangements. So that makes the importance of the deal before Brexit very crucial, of course, for industry. Moving on. So where are we now and what are the next steps, the immediate next steps? Well, as I said, the ball is very much in the EU's camp now, so we're waiting for the Council to adopt detailed recommendations for Article 50 negotiating directives based on the draft produced by the Commission and released on the 3rd of May. And waiting for the Council to also formally grant the mandate to the Commission and Mr. Barnier to open the negotiations with the UK. We're expecting all of this to happen on the 22nd of May. The UK general election being scheduled on the 8th of June. Obviously, the likely start of the negotiations would be after that, and we're saying mid-June. And obviously, we'll focus on the so-called withdrawal arrangements as a first step. And I'll come back to what that means in practice. The likely start of the scoping exercise for the future relationship, and that means the future trade relationship, the future land transport agreement, or all these parameters will probably not be discussed until the second half, if not the end of the year, or even early 2018. Next, please. This slide gives you an idea of who are the key players from the EU side. We'll add a similar slide on the UK side after the election. Essentially, what I wanted to say to FTA members in particular is that we've got good links with the teams of all these key players. We've met several times now with the EU Council task force reporting to Mr. Tusk, who was responsible for drafting the guidelines and agreeing with the sequencing of negotiations and will, of course, oversee the entire process. The Council will have a key role because, after all, they are the ones managing the process and that will need to conclude the agreement with the UK with a qualified majority. We've also had interactions with the task force on Article 50 that reports to and advises Michel Barnier. Quite crucial because they will lead the detailed negotiations. Of course, the services of the Commission will provide technical expertise and lead on trade negotiations post-Brexit as well, and we've also established contact with them. And the Parliament European Parliament should not be neglected. Guy Verhofstadt is the coordinator, but of course the wider range of MEPs will be involved in this because the Parliament at large will need to provide its consent before the Council can conclude the agreement with the UK. And we're also actively engaging with MEPs in Brussels to make sure that they know our concerns and that they've got an idea of the solutions we're exploring. Next, please. What's new compared to the last webinar is that, of course, on the 3rd of May, the Commission, the team of Mr. Barnier released their red lines, if you want, for the first phase of negotiations. These might be modified a little bit between now and Monday, when they are due to be approved by the Council. But essentially, they focus on the following topics: the situation of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU, And it's important to note that the EU wants to protect not only those who are living or working today in the UK, but also those who have lived or worked there in the past, those who will be living or working there before the date of exit of the UK, as well as their family members. And it's not just about the right to work, it's about the right of residence, and also rights relating to education, healthcare, recognition of qualifications. And they want these rights guaranteed by the European Court of Justice. That's going to be a very, very big topic of negotiations as well. The next one, that the exit bill, what's important to understand is that this is related to ongoing commitments regarding EU funding programs that the UK is part of, pensions for officials of UK nationality, and other foreign commitments. Not of huge interest to our industry, but unfortunately these discussions are likely to have a wider impact and could be quite disruptive for the entire negotiations, so worth keeping an eye on as well. Other points that were contained in the draft directives were related to goods placed on the market pre-Brexit. The EU27 side wants to ensure that these goods retain access to the market post-Brexit, but that's also good for UK products that are on the EU market. If they have market clearance today, they should keep that post-Brexit. There were points related to EU infringement procedures, involvement of the Court of Justice, as well as cooperation procedures, for instance, in the area of market surveillance for goods, or mutual assistance in taking evidence, things like that. So there, of course, the EU side wants to protect all the ongoing procedures and make sure they are not stopped because of Brexit. In terms of Ireland, they have been slightly less precise, but stating that preventing the emergence of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic will of course be a priority for the EU27 side, as will the recognition of the common travel area, which is quite an important point from an Irish point of view, as well as the Northern Irish point of view. The agreement should also address issues arising from Ireland's unique geographic situation, including the transit of goods to and from Ireland via the UK. Other points were related to governance of the withdrawal agreement, with the EU side wanting the European Court of Justice to remain competent for that. And in terms of the future relationship with the UK, it's worth stating that the EU side is saying discussions can only start once the Council feels that enough progress has been reached on the first phase of negotiations. I also wanted to update you on the non-UK EU workers situation. So as we mentioned, the status of EU citizens working in the UK is undecided at present. It will be subject to negotiations, of course. I make clear that both the UK government as well as the EU27 side want to guarantee rights for UK citizens working in the EU. But while there is an agreement in principle, the two sides might actually disagree on the scope of the agreement and the details, which could again create some delays. And bearing in mind that the future relationship will only be discussed once some of this has been agreed, it means that this could postpone the trade agreements and trade discussions a bit further. Obviously, we'll be making the case for freight transport when it comes to accessing and retaining access to EU workers. And it's fair to note that the European Parliament wants this settled first, so they will be putting a lot of pressure on all key players in this field. And I'm now going to hand over to Chris to conclude the webinar.
Yes, thank you very much, Pauline. We are having to deal with practical implications of this in what is at the moment quite a fluid political situation with a lot of unknowns. But it's fair to say that our contacts with the various government departments are working on various scenario situations, as you would expect, in the light of a hard Brexit, a deal which starts to break break down, and what happens if there isn't a deal. What are going to be the transitional arrangements if agreements in the key areas that we've outlined for the freight industry are unresolved in that time. So, the slide that we've got up there deals with, reminds people that that pre-Brexit, until the UK formally leaves the EU, we're not expecting any radical changes. So it's business as usual in that sense. So importantly, all EU rules and regulations apply. And now there clearly has been a lot of uncertainty created by the Brexit exit decision, and that's already having some impact now, purely in terms of the devaluation of the pound against the dollar and the euro. So that's already having quite big implications for importers, particularly obviously retailers and food importers, where the costs of commodities and components has increased sharply, and clearly there are benefits to exporters as well in terms of lower prices. So we're already seeing some of those implications of Brexit right now. Clearly, post-Brexit, the extent of the changes that we've talked about really depends on the kind of deal that we're able to negotiate with the EU. Again, FTA is pressing in particular for a low-friction trade arrangement with low-friction trade procedures, and that is our key priority. What we don't want is an additional layer of customs rules and red tape and controls at borders, which would cause obviously delays, cost, and would be damaging to trade between the UK and Europe. And also, it's quite clear, and we'll talk about that in a minute, a lot of our members have trading interests on the continent. We have regular contacts with our sister trade associations in Europe, and they are all very concerned about the implications for that trade with the UK going forward. So next slide, please, Carly. So what are we doing about that? Well, we're making it very clear to government in our regular meetings with Her Majesty's Customs and Revenue, the Treasury, the Department for Exiting the EU, the Department for International Trade, and the Department for Transport as our key departments, the real importance of the decisions that they make on ensuring that we do have low friction trade procedures in place that doesn't damage UK trading interests with Europe, and shapes the kind of free trade agreement that we want with Europe, but also the free trade agreements that we're going to want trading with the rest of the world, in terms of making sure that those agreements genuinely do have the opportunity of expanding trade, and therefore are based upon more preferential arrangements than the standard WTO rules going forward. So, and we are, as I said earlier, working with our counterparts in these other countries, and indeed working with the Commonwealth. There was a Commonwealth heads of state meeting planned recently, where the trade between Britain and the rest of the Commonwealth is going to be discussed in terms of how we can boost that. So there's just some of the steps that we're taking with government. These webinars and the other events that we put on, like our recent Brexit Keeper Trading conference, are really important so that we understand what members' problems are, how they're managing this, what they expect from us. And so your input is really important so that we are in a better position to represent your views with government going forward. We are now preparing a shippers checklist, and we're going to go into more detail of this on our next webinar, which will take place on the 22nd of June. So put that one in your diary. We changed the date actually for the June one from the 13th of June to the 22nd of June, where we're going to be inviting FTA members specifically. All these webinars are specifically for FTA members to go through the kind of things we believe shippers, and that is traders, importers and exporters, should be doing to prepare themselves for all the main scenarios that we've outlined. So we hope that will place members in a better position to prepare internally for how they're going to manage their trades through that process. We're continuing this on a monthly basis. These member webinar briefings, and it is really just to keep members up to speed with developments on an ongoing basis. It is, as you would appreciate, a fast-changing dynamic that's going on here. We are reaching out and engaging with our, as I said, our EU 27 partners, particularly the other trade associations, to work closely to get a better understanding with our trading partners in Europe, what the implications for trade are. And that's really important as they engage with EU 27 and the negotiating teams that Pauline outlined, start to get into the detail for the upcoming negotiations that are there. In other words, we need to ensure that the negotiators are armed with the facts and information in terms of what industry is looking for here. And finally, I think the key thing that we are now doing is that we are developing a new services for members trading with Europe, and we're about to launch that now. So if you have an interest in that, please contact either myself, Chris Welsh, or Pauline Bastidon. And this new service is aimed at our manufacturing members, our shipper members, logistics companies, and other sectors of FTA membership. And this is because, obviously, when we come out of the European Union, we need new arrangements in place where FTA can influence a European policy that will continue to affect members that trade with Europe and trade in Europe. And those companies will still need some influence in terms of the directives and regulations and review of existing legislation, which will remain on the UK book until such time as the government either amends that or repeals it under the Great Repeal Bill that the government's introduced. So there will be more information about that, but what our aim will be to provide a range of different options for members in terms of whether they just want an information service, a representation service, and more of a kind of a consultancy service if you have got particular issues that you feel that FTA needs to be taking up with the European institutions, particularly the European Commission. So the importance of our Brussels office remains ever more important in a post Brexit situation, because it becomes a key FTA interface with Europe and the European institutions. So that is, in summary, what we are doing on your behalf. And as I say, there are some steps we think that you can take, and hopefully this webinar is part of that process. It's to assess the risks to your business for imports, exports, for people, and market access. As I said, the import-export side is likely to be in relation to the kind of free trade agreement we have with Europe and the rest of the world, how that's going to impact customs procedures, border controls, and so on. The people issue, as Pauline indicated, is about the rights of current EU citizens to continue to work, reside in the UK, but also UK citizens living in the EU 27, and the market access arrangements. So key concern on the people side is clearly being able to attract the right people into the freight and logistics industry. The logistics industry, I don't think, is alone, as just listening, I'm sure you do, to the radio, to hear that other sectors, whether it's hotels and restaurants, sectors are very concerned about the potential implications for their current staff and the ability to recruit essential staff that we can't provide in the UK. The FTA is obviously there to provide an opportunity for you to raise your concerns, and that's directed to us. So any particular points that you have, please raise them, and that will enable us to voice your concerns with government, and in particular those 5 key ministries that we're dealing with at the moment, to ensure that we get the right deal for the logistics in industry. So we're encouraging members, obviously, to work with us to identify, not just identify what the problems are. I think we, to bottom out most of the potential problems here, but as is being shown through the work that we're doing with our customs group, working group, and with members in our regional and national councils, we are identifying also the kind of solutions they want to those problems. So it is, FTA is very much in the mode of not just moaning about this, but actually recommending and suggesting practical solutions to these problems. And certainly government is in a listening mode there. So there is a great opportunity to influence our future trading relationship with Europe, but more importantly, how we can improve on our trading relationship with countries outside the European Union. So we're coming to the end now of the webinar. I just want to remind you, therefore, we don't have any questions on the members on the webinar have raised today. So we're not going to propose any, but as I said earlier, if there are questions that do occur to you as a result of listening to the webinar today, then please post those with us on the website, and we will get back to you and deal with that. So our next webinar, as I said earlier, will now take place on the 22nd of June. It will run from 9:30 to 11:30, so this is an extended webinar, because we intend to go into a lot more depth into the implications for supply chains, particularly as a result of the discussions that we're currently having with Customs and Border Force about customs procedures, about the kind of use of potential trusted trader, authorised economic operator, and how we can make that shipper and operator are friendly, and that this doesn't result in additional barriers and red tape. That will be a much more in-depth study, as I indicated there. We will also be producing the checklist that I referred to earlier. We hope that will enable you to review what you need to do as an organisation, what the potential impact on your supply chains is, so that you are in a position to ensure that your company is well prepared for Brexit, whatever the outcome and the scenarios. And this webinar, as I said earlier, will be part of a new FTA service on Europe, and you know, that will be we hope will be a very good opportunity for those members that are looking for something different to what we currently provide, something a bit more in detail. As I say, if you're interested in hearing more about that, please contact Pauline Bastidon in our Brussels office, or indeed myself. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your participation in the webinar. We hope that you found that of interest, and that hopefully to update you on all that FTA is doing at the moment to ensure members are fully prepared for Brexit. So thank you again for your attention, and I will now formally close the webinar.